Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Blake, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you here. I have been at your restaurant. I've eaten at your food truck, and it's so fun to get to talk to you as a young entrepreneur in my own town. But before we get to what you're doing and all things about your business, I want to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Okay, the first job I ever had. Are you familiar with Country Corner gas station in Dresden?
I
So I
am.
grew up, right? Okay, so I grew up in Dresden. This is sort of a joke, but it was serious back in the day for me. I was born in 1995, and I think in about 2000 or 2001, my first job was a minnow dipper. And by that, I mean like in the room where they had the crickets and the minnows and all that stuff for fishermen to come in and get to take fishing. I was the official minnow dipper, and while that was sort of a family friend joke type deal, it did teach me. I did have to learn, um, what do you call it? The multiples of. It's been so long since I thought about it, but the multiples of 12. 12 times 12, 144, all that stuff, because everybody bought them in orders of a dozen. So it did teach me a little bit of math, but outside of that, my first real job. We had Black Angus cattle. My family did growing up. So basically, from the time I was old enough to weed eat or drive a tractor, drive a Polaris Ranger or anything like that. So from 12 years old and until I was probably 18 or so, kind of until I started the barbecue business. I worked on the cattle farm, mowing hay, weed eating, spraying, feeding cattle, miscellaneous stuff for years as a kid. So that, I guess, was my first job. And then I sold mulch and did a little landscaping in high school for a little extra money. I played football, so I didn't have a whole lot of time. But and then from then, unless I'm forgetting something, it was pretty well Blake's Barbecue, and then now obviously Blake's at Southern Milling. So
You are, I think you are my episode 134, I think. And I've never had someone start teaching or start working when they were 5 or 6. I just love that
right,
story. That's such a
oh
great
yeah,
story.
thank you. Hard. I mean, I remember it, but it was like a Sunday afternoon for 2 hours. Like I would do it like every other Sunday, so it was very not legitimate. But for a kid at 5 or 6 years old, that's a pretty big deal. You know.
Absolutely. And that's so formative. I mean, these are memories that you have and to be trusted and just all those things that we don't think so much about when children are really small about the world of work in which they're going into and then to work on the family farm from 12 to 18, that kind of work is so independent and develops a certain kind of confidence and competence that you have to have in order to get the work done. What
Right.
was that like through those formative teenage years, work doing that kind of work, which is, I imagine, largely independent?
Yes, ma'am. I've always enjoyed the outdoors. So it was very outdoor based. I'm in a day where I didn't run a large, well, it's a small business, obviously, but a large small business. I did a lot of outdoor activities, hunting and fishing and stuff like that. So, like, you know, let's see, I'm 29. I'd been in college, which to say I was a freshman in college 10 years ago. I would have been, probably had classes at 10 a.m. and I would have been deer hunting all morning, beforehand. Now, and we can get into that. I did my freshman year at University of Tennessee at Martin, and then I finished up at Mississippi State. But that freshman year at UTM, still back home near all of my hunting land, I was very, very outdoor driven as a kid. So it was great. I enjoyed the kind of like what helped get me into barbecue, sort of there again, the outdoors, the sort of rough and tough, splitting wood with an axe. I've always enjoyed, the hands-on aspects of stuff. So it was very, for a kid that grew up in rural West Tennessee, sort of, fancying myself as a country boy, quote unquote. it was perfect work for me. I enjoyed being around animals and all that. So it was really couldn't have been better for me at that age. Um, anyhow, so I guess that's the best answer for that.
So what did you major in college?
Ag business. So my backup plan would have been, and I decided about a year, a little before that, before I graduated, I had decided that I wanted to go ahead and pursue, a brick and mortar restaurant as a career. I opened Blake's Barbecue in Dresden originally whenever I was a sophomore in college at Mississippi State. So I did it for a couple of years, maybe before I decided I wanted to go full bore into that, as a career path. But I went ahead and finished college. Anything I've ever done, for better or worse, I do 118%, so that has it has led to some positive things for sure. But when I focus on something, it takes just about all I've got. I put everything I have forth into it. Now, since I know I'm riffing a little bit, but since then, and since the business has grown, and I've had to open up and broaden my horizons and my mindset to realizing that there's more to it all than just the bits and pieces that I enjoy. So that's been a major part of my transition over the last 3 years, 2.5, 3 years that we've been open, is sort of gaining a more 30,000 foot overhead vision versus just having my head completely engulfed in cooking. You notice I'm not cooking anything right now, so 2 years ago this would have really bothered me. I'd have been like, oh, I've got to be there. But we have people in place that are trained, that are there and take pride in it. And it's not my role to. And I've never tried to be now back 3 or 4 years ago, before I learned to let go of stuff. I'm sure I was very micromanaging as a teacher. I never had to let go before. But nowadays, I realize basically that there's far more to the business, and my role cannot just be cooking and cutting and being engulfed in meat. Now, when duty calls, there's nothing I love to do more, and I get my hands dirty every chance I get, which is every day. But whereas used to, I was 98% in the meat, 2%, basically my head was just completely engulfed and focused on all of that. I've had to break it into more of probably a 60 to 70% um, more managerial mindset, and trying to touch and be involved with all the other aspects of the business. And then, I'm still doing the other stuff as needed and as I'm able to.
You
So
know,
it's been
that's
a transition.
it's really interesting. I mean, for over 10 years, you've been in barbecue, love barbecue, and yet you had this vision when you are immersed in the meat and just spending all of this time on the cooking and the physical aspect of it. You had this vision to open a brick and mortar, and you must have known at that time that you wouldn't just be able to cook all the time, that there are gonna be this other managerial aspects. Did you so what, compelled you to open, this big, beautiful restaurant and move away from just the hands-on, day-to-day meat aspect?
Right. Well, I guess the first part of that answer would be that prior to me finding the location, the old Cellar Mill and Grain Mill location that I ended up with, uh, that the vastness of that, size, structure, and all, and everything we have going on now is not what I had in my head. Believe me. As recently, let's see, I got a hold of that structure, that property in early January 2019. So it's been 6 years, but let's just say 7 years ago, and as recently as 6 months before all that came together, I still had my mind more in thought with like a 40 seat old like taking like an old service station from 1940s that was closed down with roll up doors, something very small scale. Still doing the 11 a.m. till sell out 4 days a week type concept. So my original plan, to answer your question, my original plan was not such an elaborate, vast business and structure that it's grown into. But now that said, I do believe everything happens for a reason, and I could not be happier and feel more blessed to have the restaurant and everything that I do now. But it wasn't the original. I was thinking something much more small scale and not man. Everything's manageable. I have learned that's the main. Honestly, that's the main thing I've learned over the last 2.5 years. Everything is overcomable. That's probably not a word. Everything is manageable, and there is a solution. I guess to get back to answering the base of your question, I had the vision to open a brick and mortar restaurant, but it has evolved over time, given the opportunities that I was given back 5, 6, 7 years ago, 6 years ago. So,
Yeah, that is interesting. This vision that you have, and then how it did morph, and how you've been able to rise with the challenges that have come your way. So when you first started, it was just you, and now you oversee. I'm not sure how many people that you oversee. Dozens, I'm sure.
yes,
Yes.
ma'am. About 65 total on payroll, and most of those are, only a few of those are full time. But it's a lot. It's a lot to oversee, and luckily, the biggest part of it for me is I have great management, and that takes a world off of me, especially giving me the ability to do stuff like this. Be here talking with you this morning versus, I gave them a heads up. Hey, I'm gonna be in a little late tomorrow. I've got an interview. So I've got great people around me that it would absolutely be impossible without. So that's always the case.
Yeah.
Anytime anybody experiences some sort of success, it's hard for the public to see everything going on internally, but there's so much that goes on every day that I may have a small piece in, but I've got great people around me, in management and everything else, support from community members and folks all over. But yes, ma'am.
So how has your management style changed from when it's just you, and then you add your first person, and then it has grown to, as you said, it was hard to let go, and being a little bit micromanaging to where you are now, the trust you have in the people around you, but even you manage them, right? So how have you grown your philosophy of leadership and management? How has that changed and developed?
It is certainly turned on its head, I would say. Mostly, I don't mean forced, like it's been a forced thing, like I didn't want it, but I've just had no choice but to change my outlook, change my mindset, uh, grow with the times, grow with the business, and basically just I had to come to the realization that the business and myself and everyone else around me is never going to be able to grow to our potential with me just staying stubborn old Blake who thinks I'm not saying I never tried to be I never thought of myself as like a know-it-all. Now, to be fair, I'm sure I didn't recognize that in myself. But I'm sure was plenty guilty and still to this day am. But I have broadened my mindset to just realizing that it truly takes a village. So like you said, back as recently as fall of 2018. No, that's not. Well, of course then, but as recently as fall of 2021, early spring of 2022, it was still a small crew of just about five of us. Um, and at that point, that was the only experience I'd had was a crew from 4 to 6 or 7, and that's not very much. It was a very small scale situation. There wasn't that much in the food trailer business to have to manage.
Mm.
Now, so I was not forced out of my comfort zone really. And that was about the time, 2020 is when I hired on my first person to start training, to help cook, Libby Meadows. She is now my pit manager and has been with me for, we're going on, 5 years now. So with her specifically, and we don't talk about it much now, but we'll joke about it every once in a while about how like I just had no idea what it meant to I had always done every task that I got there, and I was there at 3 o'clock in the morning until the day was over, which could have been 2:30, and it could have in the afternoon could have been 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. But I had never had a reason or a force strength to make me teach that to anybody. So I really didn't even know. I knew all these things in my head. I knew what I was doing, and I knew how to show it, but I did not know how to do the show and trust. Maybe a
Mhm.
trust but verify. But all that was just very, very brand new to me. So um, that took a lot of time on, and then what finally got me to let go is that we had one holiday, which is it wasn't Thanksgiving, but I think it was like Super Bowl weekend. So this would have been 2021 or so, 2020, around the holidays, and we had such a big. She'd been with me for a while, and we had such a big influx of orders that I had to execute cutting inside the trailer. And I finally just had to say, "Hey, you've seen me do this, and you've done this plenty of times. Today's the day. Like I have no choice." I didn't mean that in an ugly way. Just like, "Hey, today's the day that you get to flex what you know because I have no choice, and thank goodness you're here." Because I've got to go inside and I need you to handle this. So, and that was, it took I'm not ashamed to say it because I realize it takes growth and something to spur all of that. But it took that forced situation for me to let go. Now, since then, of course, we transitioned to the restaurant where volume of everything, from slaw to, of course, meat, everything just skyrocketed exponentially. So to tell you, for the first 7 or 8 weeks we were open, yeah, about 7 weeks we were open, I was working like 106 hours a week, something like
Mm.
that. And if you do the math, there's not a whole lot of sleep that you can slip into a week. And finally, my general manager Whitney, and this is still in my stubborn days of like I'm a workhorse. This is what I do. There's no stop. Like I'm not stopping myself. There's no stopping me. I've got work to do, and didn't I had a very narrowed vision of the entirety of it. But then again, I was in my mind just doing what I thought I had to do to make the
Mhm.
business work, which in part was true. It's still true, but I was going a little too gung ho. She finally sat me down and said, "Hey, love what you're trying to do, but you're gonna have to let yourself go home and sleep. You're gonna have to take a break, or else you're gonna hurt yourself or get yourself sick, so run down, not even burn out so much as just physically sick." So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I have been going a little hard.
Mm.
So I backed off a little bit, and then still held fast. I was still, getting there at 7:30 in the morning. I backed off from getting there at 2:55 in the morning to, okay, we've got enough folks trained. I'm going to get here at 7 or 7:30. So then it transitioned to that. But I was still, cutting meat all day. And these are back in the days where, we were rocking and rolling. The first 6 months, there was no lull. If the doors were open, we were rolling. Now it's not the case. That's not the case like that nowadays. But anyway, so I was still hard at it there from 7 in the morning until 9:30 or so, 10 o'clock at night. Did that for a while. Got more people trained up. I started having family members with some health issues, so I knew I was gonna, once again, it took some forced action. Like, hey, before long, there's gonna be a funeral that you're gonna have to go to, and you're gonna have to not be the only one here that you trust.
Mm.
To this is kind of me talking to myself and kind of Whitney and I and my mom, talking and them having to, be like, hey, you're going to have to get yourself replaced. So there again, it took some forced situations. And then just to fast forward, I just over time, as I would let go a little bit, I would say I would be able to see firsthand, oh, it can go without me. And then that allowed me to be able to spread my focus, on other important parts of the business. And it's just been a slow burn transition over time, but over the last 6 or 8 months, I say I've transitioned of having to be involved in the day to day. Now, of course, we get employee call outs all the time. People get sick. Their kids have to go to the doctor. They have a death in the family. They're not feeling right. We get busier than anticipated, than we have scheduled for. I'm still involved in it all every day, but not as a scheduled in part of the schedule, more as a filling. I'm filling in the blanks. I may be making some extra slaw, maybe cutting brisket for 10 minutes. I may be putting more pickles in our pans to, you never know. But anyways, so it's been a transition, but now I'm at a point to where, of course, I still have the itch in my head to be there shoveling coals, doing it all. But I'm at a point now where, having the need and the opportunity to step away, and but most of all just be more involved, touching tables with customers, building relationships, networking, traveling, with some opportunities to go cook and teach in other parts of the country, doing stuff like this. So it's been better for everyone, better for myself and my own health, mentally and physically, but more so than personal benefit, it's better for the business growth and for me to not just be Blake the absolute barbecue guy, but Blake um the helper of handling all things.
It's so hard when you are passionate and you have the vision and you love what you do. But what
Yeah.
an absolute blessing to have people around you that you trust and that you can listen to. If sometimes we have to hear things, I know I'm a bit stubborn person as well. I have to hear things a couple of times.
Right.
But when I trust the people around me who are saying, hey, this is not good for you, or it's not good for the business, or both, and being able to hear that and then continually reimagine your role and find or because as when you're in the pit and you are doing all the meat, right, that is very important and consuming, and yet now where you are, you see that how important it is to touch those tables and to be out, and people love to see you, and then having all these other opportunities for education, and but when we're focused on one thing, we don't see all the other possibilities. So can you talk to us about a mentor you have had, that you've learned from, when it comes to your business, and what you learned from them?
Hmm. My biggest business um inspiration. There's a place that really, and I'm not gonna be able to hit them all, but this is just the first one that came to mind. A really, really smart guy in business is a guy in Belton, Texas, so kind of between north of Austin but south of Waco. Um, Belton's right off I-35. Anyways, place called Miller Smokehouse. Uh, the To give a little background on that place, you know how you know firsthand how at the restaurant the dessert counter, dessert case is between the two cashier registers. So everybody that comes to the restaurant has to see. You either have to walk by it, or 9 out of 10 times you're paying for your meal. Right, with staring at cheesecakes just to your left or right. Well, the one of the owners, part of the Miller family, at that restaurant, is a CPA by trade. He's not a whole lot older than me. I would say he's probably 37 or 38, something like that. But just a really, really genius business guy. He could go teach a business class at a college, just that type, without really being educated in that way. But he has been one of those sort of, he'll call me, or I've visited with him many times. He's been to Martin before back in the day, in the trailer days. But he's always been a good voice in my head of telling me things I don't necessarily want to hear. Like, back prior to 2019, and even the first part of 2019, whenever I moved my business from Dresden to Martin, I was open Tuesday through Friday, not Wednesday through Saturday. And I had a whole justification for that. In my mind, I thought, okay, small town, folks on weekends are, a lot of folks travel out of town, whether that's, going to Memphis Wolf Chase Mall or to the Orpheum to a show, or going to Jackson or Paducah or Nashville, getting out of town, going and doing fun stuff or shopping. Anyways, here's the voice that finally convinced me to, dude, you've got to open on Saturday. You don't, I know you think you've got justification, but you don't know what you're missing. So just stuff like that. He was a good business voice. I mentioned to you Whitney Hayes, who's my general manager. She's been in the restaurant business. Don't quote me, but another 6 years before I got into it. And I was in the trailer. I was in a food truck business for 6 years prior to the restaurant, but a completely different animal, which I've come to learn. But so she's been good for me internally. A voice. We work together 8 to 14 hours a day. So she's been a great voice in teaching me. Um, my buddy John Brotherton, who you might have seen, he passed away coming up on a year ago, about 10 and a half, 11 months ago, from Austin, Texas. He was always a very close friend, and he had a barbecue restaurant there, and he was always a great voice for me. But basically, all those folks you see on the portraits whenever you walk into the restaurant, those are all the common myth is that, or the misconception is that I have those guys up there, and Miss Tootsie. There's a lady up there. The misconception is that I have those up there because they're folks that taught me how to cook barbecue. That's not the case at all. I weren't. I'm not saying I haven't picked up bits and pieces from them just in conversation, but uh, I learned to cook barbecue by cooking a bunch of barbecue. You know what I mean? I didn't go to basketball camp. You know what I mean? Just drive away, burn something once, and think, oh, I cooked that too hot. I'm going to back off next time. Stuff like that. But really, they've been inspirations and friends and mentors in other capacities, like, hey, I've got this going on, or we're the contractors are at this point in the build out, getting ready to do this part of the kitchen. How much square footage do you suggest for the such and such section? So stuff like that. So I've just had too many to answer. But my grandfather, who's a CPA, just retired. Both of my parents, just really a plethora of great people that have been moral and wisdom support over the years. Because I was
Well,
20 years old when I started this with zero. I worked on a farm and done some landscaping. You know what I mean? Played football.
well, I love your answer because you couple this work ethic that you have, this drive and this passion, which is singular, right? I'm going to do this. And yet clearly you haven't done it alone because you've been able to reach out to others and reach out in all these different sorts of capacities. And so when we think about being successful or whatever sort of business that we are, it's so important, of course, not only to have the work ethic and to be competent in what you do, but to surround yourself and to really look out and see who are the people in my life, who are the mentors that when I have a question, I can go to, because this life is not meant to be gone at it alone. And there are people either in your organization or in your community that well, people love to share when they have a piece of knowledge. Most of us want to help others. And
Right.
so that's really a testimony to how important it is to build your network, think about your network, and be open to to suggestions and feedback, and just to be able to talk through ideas with others.
Yes, ma'am. Agreed.
So conflict is normal. That's what I do for a living. I help people with conflict in their organizations, and we don't even have to have another person, right? We can have conflict within ourselves. So when we have more than one person, we're going to have conflict. That's inevitable, and the conflict isn't bad. It can actually be really helpful because it can help us grow and develop. So, how do you deal with conflict in your business?
A lot differently than I used to. I used to get a lot more rattled. Or the biggest part of it, I used to take everything a lot more personally.
Mm,
So I think removing, I don't mean not being personable, and I don't mean that I have become impersonable. That probably wasn't correct either. But I just mean like, I just mean not reacting
mm,
out of emotion and from a place of taking things personally, but instead taking a more objective, overhead view, um and like not reacting immediately, not speaking as soon as something is said to me or a conflict is presented to me, giving myself time to synthesize the situation, gather more information, on what's actually happened, maybe gathering two or three sides of the story versus just the first version that I'm hearing. So trying to think of any other factors that go into my management of conflict. I would say, at its basis, thinking of things objectively, giving myself time to synthesize, gather more, not evidence, but gather more angles from the story. Um, Not taking things personally, not reacting on knee jerk reaction out of emotion, and thinking things through clearly overall. I think that's my answer.
yeah.
And that's not always been the case for me either. Meaning before I had to learn these, I'm not going to say skills, but I guess you could call them
Yeah,
skills.
they are skills,
I
yeah.
Right. I very much before I had the amount of experience and all of that that I do now, which has just come with staff growing from me and three or four others to me and 60, 65 others. So there's plenty of conflict all the time. That's just the nature of the world. Nobody's trying to necessarily be a cog in the wheel or ugly, but that's just whenever you put that many personalities together in one room. Some people trying really hard. Some people are not as geared towards trying, super hard. Some people think of it as more than just a way to make a paycheck, and some they're mostly because, to be frank, mom or daddy told them they had to get a job.
Mhm.
And I don't mean that personally. Obviously, we're not naming names or anything. That's just the nature
Right,
of the work.
sure.
Nature of the world and business. So yeah, just taking things slower, thinking things through, and all that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the way to solve conflict is to first de-escalate yourself, right? And so to take those emotions out of it so that you can make the best kind of decision and looking at what is the problem itself instead of the personality, right? So so that's a very mature approach to dealing with conflict. Is there something in particular that you saw within yourself that you like, I can't take this as a personal attack. I've got to be more detached. I've got to slow down. Are there any sort of events that led you to this realization, or did you just kind of just say, this is just like with the meat, this is not working. I've got to do something else, like when it gets burned.
I think a mixture. This may be a multiple part answer. I think a mixture of realizing over time that my opposite approach, my less matured version of that approach of acting more on a knee jerk basis or emotional reaction, seeing over the first, it probably took me at least a year and a half, closer to 2 years, and I'm still working on that every day. Of course, I'm sure we all are, but me specifically, um I think just a combination of seeing that not work over time, um coming to the realization, just with many events linked together, that i cannot control I cannot control everyone's happiness.
Mm,
I can only, and I mean this, I can only be the best version of me every day and try to be consistent. That's one thing about me. I think most anybody, whether they like me or not, here's what I've come up with to say about it lately. If you liked me 2 weeks ago, there's the way I see it, there's really no reason you shouldn't like me today, and vice versa. if you didn't like me 2 weeks ago, there's probably not much of a reason you should like me today, because what you see with me is pretty well what you get. Like this conversation we're having right now, this is how I would be talking to my sister, my mom, my management. It's just conversationally. Basically realizing that I can't control everybody else's emotions and what they've got going
Mhm.
on in their lives.
Mm.
There's a million different factors, and they're 99.99% of those are beyond my control or reach. So the best thing I can do is just be centered and not self-centered, but as people-centered as I can be. But also realizing that there's some things I'm just not going to be able to control or fix. So just be as calm, cool, collected, and mature about situations as possible, and hopefully they can be resolved. Not all of them can. No, they can be resolved, but not always in the way we would hope for sure.
Absolutely. In a in a a restaurant environment, in food environment, it is very fast paced. Things, as you said, sometimes you anticipate this many people and it's double, and people call out, and there's all different kinds of. It's a very fast paced environment. So, what do you do for the to order to in order to have a healthy work environment for your people? Are there any sort of policies or procedures that you have in place to help to help the environment for your employees? So that's one question. What do you see works that you've done to set up a healthy work environment? And are there any initiatives that you've tried that didn't work and that you no longer do for your employees?
Gotcha.
Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.